this exquisite painting, we see the birth of a new vessel for His Majesty's Royal Navy at Deptford Dockyard. The piece was made by the painter John Cleveley the Elder. The eye for detail here reveals that we are dealing with a man who knows his stuff. And indeed so, John Cleveley the Elder was a shipwright at Deptford Royal Dockyard, so he worked there. And talent in the arts, combined with years of observation as a shipwright, had ensured a high quality and realism of his works of art about the Royal Dockyard. This wharf proved to be a rich source of inspiration for other British maritime painters. For example, the prolific Charles Brooking was born near Deptford and was also employed here for some time. A sense of pride must have accompanied these painters for being put to work at one of the most important places of British naval history. The Deptford Dockyard was sometimes coined the Cradle of the Navy, or more simply, the King's Yard. Deptford Royal Dockyard, which is situated on the banks of the Thames River near London, was founded by King Henry VIII in 1513. This initiative was part of a larger program by the Tudor dynasty to turn the English fleet into a formidable fighting force, which was able to compete with its rivals at that time. 3 other dockyards were founded by the same king: Woolwich, Portsmouth, and Erith. Erith was soon to be abandoned, however, due to continuous flooding problems. But Woolwich, Portsmouth, and Deptford would remain important places for the Royal Navy for the centuries to come. English warships had previously already been built at Deptford sporadically on several occasions, but it was now that it became an almost permanently operating wharf and naval base which belonged to the English government. Now, why was this site chosen? Deptford is in fact situated quite some distance upstream, so it took quite some time to get the ships out into the open. Henry's decision to build a shipyard here, however, made a lot of sense if we take the historical circumstances into account. The English did not dominate the seas as they would later on, so it was deemed necessary to give these English warships some extra protection from enemy raids by stationing them some way up the Thames, where they were well defended by various shore batteries. That enemy raids were indeed a serious danger for the ships of the king was proved some 150 years later, when Michiel de Ruyter, the Dutch admiral, infamously raided the anchorage of Chatham Dockyard on the River Medway in 1667. So the fear for such an event was certainly justified. England slowly, however, came to possess one of the most powerful navies in Europe, if not the world. Deptford was therefore becoming less and less useful as a naval base. The ships of the Royal Navy started to become the island's first line of defense, the so-called Wooden Wall of Britain. Raids into the English rivers came to be regarded as something unlikely, and the Navy was now deemed able to intercept any serious enemy fighting force before they could make it to the shores of the homeland. The warships did not need any additional support from the mainland. They were now capable enough to defend themselves, and consequently it was not necessary anymore to station the ships so far away from sea in the English rivers. On the contrary, it was now seen as a disadvantage, since it would take the ships far too long before they could intercept an adversary out on the open sea. Furthermore, Deptford, as I have said before, was situated on the Thames River near London. Now, although the Thames is a relatively large river, near Deptford there was not enough space to house any serious naval fighting force. The Thames here was simply too small. For these reasons, other sites such as Portsmouth, Plymouth and Chatham became preferred operating bases for the Royal Navy due to their proximity to the North Sea and the Atlantic. Deptford, however, never ceased to be a major shipyard for the Navy. It was in fact probably the most important dockyard during the 16th century, so during the Tudor era. Many vessels were launched here, and it became a symbolic place for the Navy, with some significant events taking place here, such as the knighting of Francis Drake by Queen Elizabeth I after his circumnavigation in the Golden Hind, the famous ship. During the 17th century, Deptford was able to retain its function as an important Navy shipyard, and London continued to expand the shipbuilding facilities there. So the dockyard was able to survive the many domestic political upheavals of this century, such as the Civil War, the Commonwealth regime, the Restoration, and finally the Glorious Revolution. During the 18th century, the ships of the Royal Navy became ever larger. The Thames River was too shallow at Deptford for the launching of the larger men of war. The behemoths of the Royal Navy, the first and second raters, were consequently constructed at the larger and deeper shipyard of Woolwich. The smaller rates, however, continued to be built at Deptford. Also, due to its proximity to the offices of the Navy Board in London, the wharf became the preferred place for the construction of experimental vessels. For example, the first 74-gun third rates, designed by the prolific Thomas Slade, were laid down here in the 1750s. These new vessels would become the backbone of the Navy for the rest of the 18th century and the early 19th century. Furthermore, in the 1760s and 70s, some trials were carried out at Deptford with the sheeting of hulls with copper. For the building of all these ships, the dockyard had several building slips at its disposal. Another major activity of the yard was the repairing of ships. Before the hulls of the ships were being sheeted with copper in the late 18th century, the wooden body of a warship below its waterline needed to be cleaned every 4 months. In order to reach the ship's body below the waterline, it had to be placed into a dry dock. There were 3 dry docks in Deptford Dockyard for this purpose. The proximity to the markets of London, where many of the Navy supplies were bought, made Deptford also an ideal operating area for the victualling board. Several warehouses were built next to the shipyard where these supplies were kept. Deptford, first and foremost, delivered goods to the ships stationed at the Nore anchorage. And they even delivered some commodities to other naval bases as well. After the Napoleonic Wars, a radical drop in shipbuilding, as well as the continued increase of the size of the Navy's ships, procured Deptford's downfall in the 19th century. The shipyard was closed in 1869. The Victualling Board continued to use this location, however, well into the 1960s.